Imagine a future where every single product sold in the United States, from the coffee mug in your kitchen to the smartphone in your pocket, is made entirely within American borders. No Made in China labels, no imported electronics from South Korea, no clothes stitched in Bangladesh. Every automobile, every toy, every laptop, every tube of toothpaste is manufactured by American workers in American factories. It is a scenario that feels both patriotic and radical, a kind of economic self-reliance that some politicians and thinkers dream about. But what would such a reality actually look like? How would it reshape America's economy, the global market, and the daily lives of its citizens? The consequences, both positive and negative, would be massive, touching everything from job creation to international relations. First, let's understand what manufacturing everything in America would entail. Currently, the United States imports a staggering variety of goods, over $3 trillion worth annually, from countries across the globe. Everything from inexpensive textiles to sophisticated microchips comes from foreign factories. This system exists because global supply chains allow companies to produce goods where costs are lowest and efficiency is highest. Moving all production to the United States would dismantle this interconnected global manufacturing system. It would require building vast numbers of new factories, retraining workers, re-establishing industries that have long since moved overseas, and sourcing all raw materials domestically or through tightly controlled imports. This wouldn't just be a policy change, it would be an industrial revolution on a scale not seen since the early 20th century. On the surface, one of the most obvious benefits would be job creation. The return of mass manufacturing to U.S. soil would require millions of workers, factory operators, engineers, machine technicians, logistics specialists, and more. Towns that once suffered economic decline after factories shut down could see a revival. The so-called Rust Belt could once again become the beating heart of American manufacturing. People who have struggled to find stable employment in low-wage service jobs could transition to better-paying manufacturing roles. The demand for skilled labor would also boost training programs, apprenticeships, and vocational education, potentially reducing unemployment rates dramatically. However, while employment might increase, the nature of modern manufacturing means automation would still dominate. Much of the manufacturing process today relies on advanced robotics and artificial intelligence to keep production efficient and competitive. This means that while there would be more jobs, there might not be as many as people imagine compared to the manufacturing booms of the 1950s or 1960s. The jobs created would also require higher technical skills, meaning a massive national effort in workforce retraining would be necessary. Then there's the issue of cost. Right now, many goods are inexpensive because they are produced in countries with lower labor costs, lower regulatory burdens, and cheaper production expenses. If all goods were made in the United States, production costs would skyrocket due to higher wages, stricter environmental regulations, and more expensive raw materials. This would inevitably lead to much higher prices for consumers. The $20 pair of jeans from a fast fashion retailer might cost $80 or more. Smartphones could easily double in price. Everyday items like kitchen utensils, light bulbs, and even socks could become luxury purchases for lower-income households. Inflation could spike as the entire consumer price index adjusts to the higher cost of goods. Of course, these higher prices might also change consumer culture. Americans might begin to value durability and quality over cheap, disposable goods. Instead of buying multiple inexpensive items that wear out quickly, people might invest in fewer but better-made products. This could lead to a cultural shift toward minimalism and sustainability, reducing waste and promoting long-term use. However, the transition period would be painful for those struggling financially, as they adjust to a marketplace where everything costs more. In terms of the U.S. economy, manufacturing all goods domestically could boost GDP in significant ways. Domestic factories would generate more economic activity, increase corporate tax revenues, and reduce the trade deficit. Currently, the U.S. imports far more than it exports, leading to a trade imbalance that some argue undermines economic strength. If America produced all its goods, imports would plummet, potentially turning the trade deficit into a trade surplus. This would also mean less dependence on foreign governments for critical supplies, something that became a glaring issue during the COVID-19 pandemic, when shortages of masks, ventilators, and other medical equipment revealed vulnerabilities in the supply chain. However, the global reaction would be intense. Many countries depend heavily on exporting goods to the United States. If the US stopped buying from them, their economies could collapse or face severe recessions. This would strain diplomatic relationships and could even lead to trade wars. The World Trade Organization might see unprecedented disputes, and America could be accused of violating trade agreements. Retaliatory tariffs on US exports would likely follow, hurting industries like agriculture, aerospace, and services. Global economic stability could be shaken as countries scramble to find new markets for their goods. From a national security perspective, manufacturing everything domestically could be seen as a strategic advantage. The US would no longer be vulnerable to supply chain disruptions caused by geopolitical tensions. No foreign government could cut off access to critical components in times of conflict. Essential industries like pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, and defense equipment would be entirely under American control. This level of independence could make the US far more resilient in the face of crises. But it would also come at the cost of reduced international cooperation, as economic interdependence has historically played a role in maintaining peace between major powers. Environmental impacts are another important consideration. On one hand, bringing manufacturing back to the US could reduce carbon emissions associated with shipping goods across the globe. Shorter supply chains mean fewer cargo ships burning fossil fuels. On the other hand, increasing domestic production could raise emissions within the US unless renewable energy sources power factories. Additionally, sourcing all raw materials domestically could lead to increased mining and drilling, putting pressure on natural resources and ecosystems. The transformation of the American landscape would be dramatic. Manufacturing hubs would spring up across the country, from the Midwest to the South to rural areas seeking economic revitalization. Cities might experience population booms as people move closer to job opportunities. Infrastructure would need massive upgrades to handle increased industrial activity. Better roads, expanded rail systems, improved ports, and enhanced energy grids. The government might need to invest trillions of dollars in public works projects to support the new industrial economy. Socially, the shift could create a renewed sense of national pride. Made in USA would become more than just a marketing slogan. It would be a way of life. People might feel more connected to the origins of their products, knowing they were made by fellow citizens. This could foster a greater sense of community and shared destiny. However, the downside could be a rise in nationalism and protectionism, which might deepen divisions between the US and the rest of the world. The technology sector would undergo a major transformation as well. Right now, many electronics rely on components made overseas, especially in Asia. To manufacture everything domestically, the US would need to develop its own massive semiconductor industry, along with battery production, precision engineering facilities, and specialized manufacturing plants. This would require huge investments in research, innovation, and skilled labor training. While the US has the capacity to lead in high-tech manufacturing, building this infrastructure from scratch would take years, if not decades. Healthcare and pharmaceuticals are another critical area. Currently, many medications and medical devices are produced overseas. Domestic manufacturing would secure the supply chain for these essential goods, reducing the risk of shortages during emergencies. However, it could also drive up healthcare costs if production expenses rise, leading to higher prices for everything from insulin to surgical equipment. The agricultural sector could also feel the effects indirectly. While America grows much of its own food, many agricultural tools, fertilizers, and machinery parts are imported. Domestic production of these goods would require expanded manufacturing capabilities, potentially raising costs for farmers. This could, in turn, increase food prices for consumers. Over time, a fully self-reliant manufacturing economy could make the US less vulnerable to global economic downturns. While other nations struggle with volatile trade markets, America could maintain stability through its internal supply chains. However, isolation from global trade might also mean missing out on technological innovations, cultural exchanges, and the benefits of international collaboration. In the end, the vision of America manufacturing all its own goods is a double-edged sword. It promises economic revitalization, national security, and independence, but at the cost of higher prices, strained global relations, and massive structural adjustments. The transition would be one of the most challenging projects in modern history, requiring political will, public support, and decades of coordinated effort. If such a future ever came to pass, it would redefine not only the American economy but the very identity of the nation. The stars and stripes on every product would tell a story of resilience, determination, and self-reliance, but also of the sacrifices made to achieve it. The world would watch perhaps with envy, perhaps with resentment, as the United States attempted to prove that a modern superpower could thrive without leaning on the global marketplace. Whether it would succeed or struggle would depend on the delicate balance between ambition and reality, between pride and pragmatism.